Stepbrother burst into my home, and stepmom's shocking demand left me speechless. Growing up, life was simple. It was just me and my dad. My mom passed away when I was really young, too young to fully understand what was happening. I have only a few blurry memories of her smile, the way she used to hum while cooking, and the warmth of her hugs. After she was gone, it was just the two of us. My dad did his best to fill both roles, and honestly, he did a pretty good job. He was a hard-working guy, the kind who'd spend long hours at work but still make time for me. He never missed a school play or a soccer game, and we had our little routines. Friday nights were for takeout and movies, and Sundays meant pancakes and trips to the park. Looking back, those were the good days, even if we didn't have much. Things started to change when I was around 12. That's when my dad met Lisa. I remember the first time he brought her home. He was nervous, like a teenager on his first date. Lisa seemed nice enough at first. She smiled a lot, asked me about school, and even brought cookies. I could tell she was trying, and as much as I missed my mom, I wanted my dad to be happy. For a while, things were okay. When my dad married Lisa, I was about 12. I didn't have much say in the matter, and honestly, I tried to make the best of it. But it quickly became clear that Ethan, Lisa's son, was the golden boy. No matter what he did, it was always brushed under the rug, while I had to toe the line. Ethan was one of those guys who seemed to float through life without a care. He never held down a job for long, constantly flaking out on responsibilities, and Lisa always made excuses for him. "He's just figuring things out," she'd say, or "he'll find his way eventually." Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, getting good grades, helping around the house, and basically being the opposite of Ethan. It wasn't just about the chores or schoolwork, though. It was the way Lisa treated us differently. If I messed up, even a little, there were consequences. I'd get grounded, have privileges taken away, the whole 9 yards. But Ethan? He could screw up big time and barely get a slap on the wrist. He'd miss curfew, skip school, or blow off family obligations, and Lisa would just shrug it off. "Boys will be boys," she'd say. Yeah, okay. What really drove me nuts was how oblivious my dad seemed to it all. He tried to be a father figure to Ethan, which I understood. But sometimes it felt like he was so focused on blending the family that he didn't notice how much Lisa favored Ethan. I remember this one time. I had worked all summer mowing lawns and doing odd jobs to save up for a new bike. I was so proud of myself. But right before I bought it, Ethan decided he wanted a new gaming console. Lisa convinced my dad to chip in for it, using some of the money Dad had been saving for something else. I ended up having to settle for a cheaper bike because there wasn't enough left for what I wanted. It wasn't just the material stuff, though. The favoritism seeped into every aspect of our lives. If we had family gatherings or holidays, Ethan was always front and center. He'd crack jokes, hog the attention, and Lisa would beam like he was the second coming. Meanwhile, I'd sit there quietly, knowing that no matter what I did, I'd never be the center of attention like Ethan. One of the most infuriating things was how Ethan always managed to charm his way out of trouble. There was this one time in high school when he got caught sneaking out late at night. Instead of grounding him, Lisa laughed it off, saying, "At least he's adventurous." But when I stayed out late once because I lost track of time with friends, I was grounded for 2 weeks. The double standards were ridiculous. After high school, things didn't change much. Ethan bounced from one dead-end job to another, always quitting when things got tough. He'd spend months unemployed, lounging around Lisa's house while she cooked, cleaned, and catered to him like he was a guest. She'd say he was just in a rough patch or trying to find his passion. Meanwhile, I was busting my butt, working full-time, and trying to carve out a life for myself. It wasn't like Ethan was a terrible person or anything. He wasn't malicious or mean, just lazy. He didn't have any drive or ambition. And Lisa's constant coddling only made it worse. She was always there to bail him out, whether it was covering his rent when he couldn't pay or making excuses for his latest job loss. I lost count of how many times she asked me to help him out, lend him money, or give him a place to crash. And every time, I'd have to remind her that Ethan needed to stand on his own 2 feet. One time, I actually tried to talk to Ethan about it. I told him he needed to step up, find something he cared about, and stick with it. He just shrugged and said, "I'll figure it out eventually." That was his go-to line. Always eventually, never now. It was frustrating to watch, but what could I do? Lisa wasn't going to change, and Ethan wasn't going to grow up as long as she kept enabling him. What made it harder was that Lisa never saw anything wrong with how she treated us. In her eyes, she was just being a good mom, looking out for her kid. But to me, it felt like she was undermining everything I worked for. I had to claw my way to every bit of success, while Ethan coasted along, knowing Lisa would always have his back. My dad noticed, of course. He wasn't blind. But he wanted to keep the peace, so he stayed quiet more often than not. I think he hoped things would balance out eventually, that Lisa would come around and treat us fairly. But they didn't. The favoritism grew more blatant, and the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. One of the worst parts was how isolated I started to feel. The house that once felt like a safe haven began to feel like a battleground. I was always on edge, always waiting for the next unfair punishment, or the next time Lisa would cover for Ethan while throwing me under the bus. It wasn't just the little things, like who had to do the chores or who got the last piece of cake. It was the constant reminder that in Lisa's eyes, Ethan was her priority. Even though I tried to keep my head down and focus on my own life, it was hard not to feel the weight of it all. My dad did his best to be there for me, but I could see the toll it was taking on him too. He wanted to keep the family together, to make this new life work, but it was clear that the balance was off, and it wasn't getting better. By the time I was a teenager, I was counting down the days until I could move out. I didn't hate my dad, not by a long shot, but the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I had to endure, a place where I wasn't fully welcome. When I finally moved out, it was a relief. I found a tiny apartment, started working, and tried to build a life for myself. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. I didn't have to deal with Lisa's favoritism or Ethan's antics anymore. I could breathe. Fast forward a few years, and life took a turn I wasn't expecting. My dad passed away. It wasn't sudden, he'd been sick for a while, but it didn't make it any easier. Losing him felt like losing the last connection to those simpler times, the days when it was just the two of us against the world. After the funeral, there was the matter of the will. I wasn't expecting much. My dad had always been a hard-working man, but we weren't rich. Still, he left me a modest inheritance, a way to help me get ahead. It wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to give me a fresh start. With that inheritance, I made a decision. I was tired of just scraping by, of living in cramped apartments, and feeling like I was always one step behind. I wanted more. So I started looking for a place in the city, a place I could finally call my own. It wasn't easy. The city is expensive, and finding the right spot felt like a never-ending process. But after weeks of searching, I found it. A sleek, modern apartment in a great neighborhood. It had everything I wanted: space, light, and a view that made me feel like I was on top of the world. Using part of the inheritance for the down payment, along with my savings and a loan, I made it happen. Moving in felt surreal. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. This was my space, my fresh start. I thought that with my dad gone and a new home to focus on, I could finally leave the past behind. But as I stood in that new apartment, looking out at the city lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that my fresh start might come with a few strings attached. Little did I know the past wasn't done with me yet. So I was just getting into a groove with my new apartment, finally feeling like I was building a life for myself away from all the family drama. Things were quiet, and I was finally able to breathe a little. But of course, Lisa couldn't let me have that peace for long. One day I got a call from her and she wanted to meet up. She didn't say much over the phone, just that it was important and we needed to talk in person. I figured, okay, maybe she finally accepted that I wasn't going to take Ethan in, and she just wanted to hash things out one last time. I wasn't thrilled about meeting her, but I agreed. I thought it'd be easier to get it over with face to face. We arranged to meet at this cafe near my place. It was a nice spot, one of those places with decent coffee and a relaxed vibe. I got there a bit early, grabbed a table by the window and waited. Lisa walked in about 10 minutes later, but she wasn't alone. Behind her was Ethan, and honestly, I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't going to be a simple chat. Lisa sat down first, giving me this tight smile like she was trying to play nice, but it was clear she had an agenda. Ethan slid into the seat next to her, looking as uninterested as ever. The moment they were both settled, Lisa launched right in. "Thanks for meeting with us," she started, like we were at some kind of business meeting. "I wanted to give Ethan a chance to talk to you directly." I just stared at her, not saying anything, waiting for whatever she was about to hit me with. Ethan, of course, didn't say a word at first. He just sat there, picking at the sleeve of his hoodie, avoiding eye contact. It was Lisa who kept the conversation going. "Look, Ethan's in a tough spot right now," she said, leaning in a little like she was about to share some big secret. "He really needs a place to stay, and your family. I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this." I could feel my frustration building. "Lisa," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, "we've been over this. I can't take Ethan in. I've got my own life to manage, and I can't have him crashing at my place. Before Lisa could respond, Ethan finally spoke up. "It's just for a little while," he muttered, not even looking at me. "I'll get back on my feet, I promise." That was rich coming from him. I'd heard that promise before, and it never meant anything. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Ethan, I've got nothing against you personally, but this isn't about just giving you a place to crash. You need to figure things out, man. You can't keep relying on other people to bail you out." Lisa jumped in again, her tone getting sharper. "You know, your father would have wanted you to help. He always believed in family, and I can't believe you're turning your back on us." That hit a nerve. Bringing Dad into it was a low blow, and she knew it, but I wasn't about to back down. "My dad also believed in working hard and standing on your own 2 feet, I shot back. "I've worked my ass off to get where I am, and I'm not about to throw that away because you think I owe Ethan something." Things got heated after that. Lisa started going on about how Ethan had no one else, how I was being selfish, and how I was letting the family down. Ethan just sat there, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, which honestly pissed me off even more. If he wanted help, he could at least look like he cared about the conversation. At some point, Lisa dropped the bombshell she'd clearly been saving for the right moment. "If you don't help, I'll have to take legal action," she said, her voice cold. "You used part of the inheritance for that apartment, and technically Ethan has a claim." That was it. I felt my blood pressure spike. "Are you serious right now?" I snapped. "You're really going to drag this into court just to force me to take Ethan in?" Lisa didn't even flinch. "I'm just doing what's best for my son," she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I couldn't believe it. She was willing to wreck our already strained relationship just to push this on me. I stood up, grabbing my jacket. "You know what, Lisa? If that's how you want to play it, fine. Do what you have to do, but don't expect me to roll over and let you walk all over me." With that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving them sitting there. I was fuming. I couldn't believe the lengths Lisa was willing to go to. The whole thing felt like a setup from the start, like they'd planned this ambush together. And the worst part? I knew this wasn't the end of it. Lisa wasn't going to give up that easily, and Ethan was going to ride this out as long as he could. On my way home, I couldn't help but replay the whole conversation in my head, thinking about all the ways I could have handled it differently. But deep down, I knew there was no winning with Lisa. She'd always find a way to twist things to her advantage. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was exhausted, both mentally and emotionally. I dropped onto the couch, staring out the window at the city lights, trying to figure out what my next move would be. One thing was clear, though. This fight was far from over. After that ambush at the cafe, I thought maybe, just maybe, Lisa would take the hint and back off. But nope. A couple of days later, I got an email from my dad's old attorney. It was one of those "we need to talk" kind of emails that never means anything good. I figured Lisa must have stirred something up, but I didn't expect what came next. The attorney, Mr. Davis, asked me to come by his office to discuss an important matter regarding your late father's estate. The whole thing felt off. My dad's estate had been settled ages ago, or so I thought, but I showed up anyway, more out of curiosity than anything else. When I got to Davis's office, he wasted no time getting to the point. "Michael," he said, "your stepmother has raised concerns about the use of inheritance funds for your apartment. She's suggesting that legally, your stepbrother has a right to the property." I almost laughed. "Are you serious? Lisa's really trying to pull that?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. Davis nodded, looking all serious. "She's claiming that since part of the apartment was purchased using inheritance money, Ethan has a stake in it. If this goes to court, there's a chance a judge might agree." Now, I'm no lawyer, but even I could see how ridiculous this sounded. "Davis, come on. The inheritance was split between us, fair and square. I used my share along with my own savings and a loan to buy the place. Ethan got his share too. What he did with it is his business." "That's true," Davis said, leaning back in his chair. "But the law can be tricky when it comes to family disputes. Lisa's argument is weak, but if she pushes hard enough, it could become a headache." Great. Just what I needed. A legal headache, courtesy of Lisa. I left the office feeling like I'd been sucker punched. I couldn't believe she was willing to drag this mess into court, all because I refused to let Ethan crash at my place. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Lisa had always been manipulative, but this was a new low. She was really going to play dirty. I decided it was time to fight back. The next morning, I called up a lawyer I'd been recommended by a friend, someone who specialized in estate disputes. If Lisa wanted a fight, I wasn't going to roll over. When I met with my new lawyer, Sarah, she was quick to get down to business. "Michael, do you have any documentation of how the apartment was paid for?" she asked. "Yeah, I've got all the receipts, bank statements, everything," I said. "The inheritance only covered about 10% of the cost. The rest was my savings and a loan." Sarah nodded, looking satisfied. "Good. That's going to help. But we need to dig a little deeper. I want to make sure there are no surprises." Surprises. That word stuck with me. With Lisa, there were always surprises. And sure enough, it didn't take long for one to pop up. A week later, Sarah called me into her office. "Michael, I found something interesting while reviewing your father's estate records," she said, her tone serious. "What kind of interesting?" I asked, bracing myself. "There are assets that were never disclosed during the initial settlement. Investments, property, accounts that your father owned, but were somehow overlooked. It seems Lisa didn't report them when the estate was divided." I sat there, stunned. "Wait, you're telling me Lisa hid assets from me?" "That's what it looks like," Sarah said. "If these assets were part of your father's estate, they should have been included in the inheritance split, but Lisa claimed them as her own." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lisa had always been shady, but this was next level. She'd actually hidden a chunk of my dad's wealth and kept it for herself. And now she had the nerve to come after me for my apartment? "What do we do now?" I asked, my mind racing. "Well," Sarah said, "we have two options. We can file a claim to contest the original estate settlement, which could lead to a lengthy court battle. Or we can use this as leverage to get Lisa to back off." I didn't need to think twice. "Let's go after her," I said. "If she wants to play dirty, fine, but she's not getting away with this." Over the next few weeks, things got intense. Sarah and her team gathered all the evidence, and it turned out Lisa had been sitting on a small fortune. Investments, a rental property, even a few hefty bank accounts. All of it hidden from me when the estate was divided. Meanwhile, Lisa was still trying to push her claim on my apartment. She'd even roped in a few family members to pressure me, sending messages about how family should stick together and "Ethan needs your help." It was all nonsense, and I wasn't buying it. The day finally came when Sarah filed the claim. It was official. We were going after Lisa for hiding assets. The look on her face when she found out? Priceless. She hadn't seen it coming, and for once, she didn't have a quick comeback. But I knew this wasn't the end. Lisa was a fighter, and she wasn't going to go down without a fight. Still, I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting to her games. I was taking control. As we prepared for the legal battle ahead, I couldn't help but think about how things had gotten to this point. Lisa had always been about control, about making sure Ethan had an easy ride. And now, she was willing to tear the family apart to keep that going. But I wasn't the same kid who had to put up with her crap back then. I had my own life now, my own space, and I wasn't going to let her mess that up. This was my fight, and I was ready for it. So, after all the digging, filing claims, and legal back and forth, things were finally coming to a head. Lisa had been caught red-handed hiding assets from my dad's estate. I thought catching her in that lie would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't that simple. When word got around that I was taking Lisa to court, the family freaked out. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about what I was doing. "Why can't you just let it go?" Or, "She's your stepmom, you should be helping her, not dragging her through court." Yeah, because she was such a saint, right? I couldn't believe how quickly they all lined up behind her. Most of these people hadn't given me the time of day for years, but now they were blowing up my phone, telling me how I was tearing the family apart. It was hard not to feel a little isolated. I mean, it's not like I enjoyed the drama. I just wanted to live my life in peace, in my apartment, without Lisa and Ethan trying to weasel their way in. But no. Now I was the villain for standing up for myself. It was exhausting. The court dates were grueling. Every time I walked into that courtroom, I felt like I was walking into a war zone. Lisa sat there with this smug look on her face, acting like she was untouchable. She even had the nerve to throw me pitying glances, as if I was some lost child she had to put up with. But Sarah was a beast. She tore through every one of Lisa's excuses like a hot knife through butter. Lisa's whole defense was built on lies, and it showed. When Sarah laid out the hidden assets, the judge's expression said it all. You could tell they weren't buying Lisa's sob story about accidentally forgetting to mention those investments and accounts. The final ruling? In my favor. Lisa had to cough up what she owed from the hidden assets. The judge also threw out her ridiculous claim about Ethan having a right to my apartment. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could finally breathe again. But the fallout didn't stop there. After the ruling, Lisa and her little fan club of family supporters went into overdrive. They started spreading rumors about me, making it sound like I was the greedy one, that I was obsessed with money. I even got messages from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all asking why I was treating Lisa so badly. It was frustrating, but at the same time, I didn't care. I knew the truth. Lisa had tried to scam me, plain and simple. And now that she'd lost, she was doing everything she could to save face. I wasn't about to let her nonsense get to me. I had bigger things to focus on. But then, Ethan showed up. I hadn't heard from him since the ambush at the cafe, so seeing him on my doorstep was a surprise. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days, and for a second I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant. I wasn't in the mood for another guilt trip, but I let him in. We sat down and he started rambling about how Lisa had kicked him out after losing the case. She was selling the house and didn't want him around anymore. He was desperate and needed a place to stay. I cut him off before he could get too deep into his sob story. "Ethan, we've been through this. I can't help you. You need to figure this out on your own." He nodded, looking defeated. "I know, man, I don't have anywhere else to go." It was hard to hear. Despite everything, I didn't hate Ethan. He wasn't a bad guy, just lazy and too used to having Lisa bail him out. But I couldn't be the one to save him. If I let him stay, it would just be another cycle of him relying on someone else to fix his problems. "I can't let you stay here," I said firmly. "You need to find another solution." He didn't argue. He just stood up, thanked me for hearing him out, and left. It was the most mature interaction we'd ever had, which honestly was kind of sad. After that, things started to settle down. Lisa faded into the background, probably busy trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. The family slowly stopped bugging me, realizing they weren't going to change my mind. I finally had my peace. But there was still this nagging feeling, like the whole ordeal had left a permanent scar. I didn't trust people the way I used to. The way Lisa had manipulated everyone, turning them against me, showed me just how quickly things could turn ugly. It was a hard lesson, but one I wouldn't forget. In the end, I came out stronger. I stood up for myself, defended what was mine, and didn't let anyone walk all over me. It wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't fun, but it was necessary. Now I could finally focus on living my life the way I wanted, without the constant shadow of family drama hanging over me. And as for Ethan, I don't know where he ended up, but I hope he figured things out. Maybe getting cut off was the wake-up call he needed. Or maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had done my part, and now it was time to move on. Update. It had been a few months since the court ruled in my favor, and for the first time in what felt like forever, my life was calm. No constant phone calls from Lisa, no guilt trips, no unexpected visits. I had finally settled into a routine, focusing on myself and my new life in the city. The weight of all the family drama was starting to lift, but as life often reminds us, peace is rarely permanent. One evening, I was lounging on the couch halfway through a movie when my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was just another spam call or notification, but when I checked the screen, I saw her name, Lisa. My first instinct was to ignore it. After everything she put me through, what could she possibly want now? But something in me, maybe curiosity, or just the lingering sense of duty, made me pick up. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause on the other end, and then her voice came through, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Michael, it's me." "I know," I replied a bit coldly. "What do you want, Lisa?" Another pause. This wasn't the usual confident, manipulative Lisa I was used to. She sounded defeated. I need your help," she finally said. I let out a sigh. Of course she needed help. She always needed help. "Help with what?" "My life's fallen apart since the court case," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The house. It's gone. I had to sell it. The money's almost gone too. Michael, I've got nothing left." I stayed silent, letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to feel smug, to tell her this was exactly what she deserved. But there was no satisfaction in hearing her like this. She sounded genuinely broken. "I don't have anywhere else to turn," she continued. "Ethan's struggling too. I just need a little help, just enough to get back on my feet." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "Why me, Lisa? After everything you've done, why would you think I'd help you?" "Because you're the only one who can," she said quietly. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I've been awful, but I'm desperate." There it was, the admission I never thought I'd hear from her. Lisa, admitting she'd been wrong, even if it was just a little. It didn't erase the years of manipulation and the constant scheming, but it was something. "I'll think about it," I said, my tone still distant, "but don't get your hopes up." She thanked me, her voice barely above a whisper, and we ended the call. I sat there for a long time staring at my phone, trying to process what just happened. Lisa, the woman who had spent years making my life a living hell, was now begging for my help. It felt surreal. The next couple of days, her words echoed in my head. I didn't owe her anything. She had made her bed and now she was lying in it. But despite everything, I couldn't shake the image of her, desperate and defeated. I wasn't sure if it was pity or just a lingering sense of responsibility, but I couldn't completely turn my back on her. After some thinking, I made my decision. I wasn't going to let her move in or bail her out entirely, but I could give her a little help, just enough to get her through the next couple of weeks. I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for myself, to close this chapter on my terms. I called her back. "Lisa, listen carefully," I began. "I'll send you a small amount, just enough to cover the basics for a couple of weeks. But that's it. Don't ask for more." She sounded relieved, almost tearful. "Thank you, Michael. I can't tell you how much this means." "Don't make it more than it is," I warned. "This is temporary. You need to figure things out on your own." She promised she would, and I transferred the money. It wasn't a lot, just enough to cover food and rent for a short while. After that, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt lighter, knowing I'd done something good, even for someone who didn't really deserve it. But another part of me was bracing for what might come next. Lisa wasn't the type to let things go easily. The weeks passed, and things stayed quiet. I didn't hear from Lisa again, which was both a relief and a surprise. Maybe she'd taken my warning seriously, or maybe she was too busy dealing with her own problems to bother me. Either way, I was glad to have my space back. But deep down, I knew this wouldn't be the end. Lisa had a way of bouncing back, and when she did, it usually meant trouble. Still, I wasn't going to spend my days worrying about her. I had my own life to live, and I was finally starting to feel like I could move forward. In the end, I realized that helping Lisa wasn't about her at all. It was about me, about proving to myself that I could rise above the mess, that I could do the right thing even when it was hard. It didn't erase the past or make everything okay, but it was a step in the right direction. For now, that was enough. Update 2. It had been a few months since I helped Lisa out, and surprisingly, things stayed quiet. I hadn't heard from her or Ethan, and I figured they were finally dealing with their own problems. Life was starting to feel normal again. I was focused on work, making new friends, and just enjoying the peace that came with not constantly looking over my shoulder for the next wave of family drama. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Lisa. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. Curiosity won out, and I picked up. "Michael," she began, her voice steady but softer than usual. "I have something for you." I sighed, already feeling the familiar tension creep back in. "Lisa, if this is another request for help, It's not," she interrupted. "It's a letter from your father." That stopped me cold. "A letter? What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath. "I found it while packing. It was hidden in one of his old boxes. It's addressed to you. I think you should have it." I didn't know what to say. A letter from Dad? After all this time? Part of me was skeptical, wondering if this was another one of Lisa's manipulations, but there was something in her tone that felt different, genuine. "Okay," I finally said. "Where can we meet?" We agreed on a neutral spot, a park not far from my place. When I arrived, Lisa was already there, sitting on a bench, holding a small, worn envelope. She handed it to me without a word, her expression unreadable. I took it, unsure of what to expect. "Thanks," I said quietly. She nodded. "I'll leave you to it." And just like that, she walked away. No drama, no guilt trips, nothing. I sat on the bench, staring at the envelope for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. The handwriting was unmistakably my dad's, strong, deliberate strokes. I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around, and for that, I'm sorry. There are so many things I wish I could have told you in person, but life doesn't always give us that chance. First, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've always been strong, independent, and kind. I know things haven't been easy, especially after your mom passed, but you've carried yourself with grace and strength. I'm sorry I wasn't always there in the way you needed me to be. When I married Lisa, I hoped it would bring us all closer, give you a family again, but I know it didn't turn out that way. I saw the struggles, the unfairness, and the way you were treated differently. I should have done more to protect you, to stand up for you. That's my biggest regret. The inheritance wasn't just about money, Michael. It was my way of trying to give you a chance at the life you deserve. I wanted you to have a fresh start, a chance to build something for yourself without the weight of the past dragging you down. I knew Lisa would look after Ethan, but you needed someone to look after you too. I hope the money helped, but more than that, I hope you find peace. I hope you forgive me for the times I failed you. And I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive Lisa. She's not perfect, but she tried in her own way. Take care of yourself, son. Live a life that makes you happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. With love, Dad. By the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling. The letter hit me harder than I expected. All the emotions I'd buried, the anger, the sadness, the longing, they all came rushing back at once. I sat there for a long time, just processing everything. My dad knew. He knew how hard it had been for me, and he regretted not doing more. That acknowledgement, even years later, meant more than I could put into words. And Lisa? She had held on to this letter, kept it hidden until now. For once, it felt like she wasn't trying to manipulate or control the situation. She simply gave me something that belonged to me, no strings attached. I wasn't angry at her anymore. Maybe it was the letter, or maybe I'd just grown tired of holding on to all that resentment. But whatever it was, I felt a sense of release. I could finally let go of the past and focus on the future. But forgiving Lisa didn't mean I wanted her back in my life. I couldn't go back to the way things were, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship that had caused me so much pain. This was closure, plain and simple. Later that evening, as I sat in my apartment, the letter resting on the table in front of me, I felt a strange sense of peace. My dad's words had given me something I didn't even realize I needed: permission to move on. Lisa might still reach out from time to time, and maybe Ethan would pop up again, but I knew where I stood now. I didn't owe them anything, but I didn't have to carry the weight of our shared past anymore either. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. It was a part of my story, a reminder of where I came from, but it didn't define where I was going. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly move forward, and that was enough.